In the violent waters of the Atlantic, where storms shattered ships and empires believed they ruled the sea, one woman became a legend. She was not born in a palace. She was not raised to obey a crown. She was raised by wind, salt, and war. Her name was Grace O'Malley. To the English, she was a rebel, a pirate, and a threat. To her own people, she was something far more dangerous to an empire. She was a protector, a chieftain, and a queen without a crown. At a time when England was tightening its grip on Ireland, Grace refused to kneel. She fought with ships, with strategy, and with sheer will. And one day, when the empire thought it could break her, Grace O'Malley did the unthinkable. She sailed into the heart of English power to face Queen Elizabeth I herself. This is the story of the pirate queen who terrified an empire. Long before England feared her name, Grace O'Malley was just a child growing up on the wild western edge of Ireland. She was born into the O'Malley clan, a powerful Gaelic Irish family whose life, wealth and survival depended on the sea. This was not a world of quiet courtrooms or royal gardens. It was a world of salt air, rough tides, hard bargains and sudden violence. Grace's father, Ugan Dubdara O'Malley, was a clan chief and a seafaring leader. From him she learned that the ocean was not just water. It was power. On these shores, a child did not simply grow up listening to stories. She grew up watching ships come and go, hearing the language of trade, conflict and command. According to legend, when she was told that girls did not belong on ships, Grace cut off her hair and demanded to sail anyway. Whether every detail of that story is true or not, it captures something important. Even as a girl, Grace was already refusing the limits others tried to place on her. While others saw danger in the Atlantic, Grace saw a teacher. The sea taught her how to read the wind, judge the tide, and stay calm when the world turned violent. That is where her real education began. Not in a palace, but on the edge of the Atlantic. Not with courtiers, but with sailors, chiefs, and storms. Before she became the pirate queen, Grace O'Malley was a daughter of the sea, and the sea was already shaping her into something extraordinary. But Grace O'Malley did not grow up in a peaceful Ireland. She grew up in a land divided by clans, castles, and old rivalries. Across the island, Gaelic families ruled their own territories, made their own alliances, and settled their own disputes. To the people who lived there, this was simply the way the world worked. But to England, it looked like chaos waiting to be controlled. By the time Grace was growing into adulthood, the Tudor rulers of England were trying to tighten their grip on Ireland. They wanted Irish chiefs to obey English law, accept English authority, and become loyal servants of the crown. But the west of Ireland was not easy to command from a distant palace. Its mountains, bays, islands, and storms made every order harder to enforce. And that was exactly where Grace O'Malley's power lived. Not in marble halls, but in harbours, hidden coves, and dangerous waters. Whoever controlled the sea controlled trade. Whoever controlled trade controlled wealth. And whoever controlled wealth could raise warriors, build alliances, and survive. That is why Grace was more than a sailor. She was part of a political world where ships could be as important as castles. To London, a woman commanding ships on the edge of the empire was not just unusual. It was dangerous. Because Grace did not fit the role England expected from an Irish woman, an Irish chief, or an Irish subject. She was not waiting to be ruled. She was already ruling her own world. In 16th century Ireland, marriage was not only about love. For powerful families, it was about land, loyalty, and survival. Grace O'Malley's first marriage was to Donal O'Flaherty, a fierce Irish clan lord from another powerful coastal family. To outsiders, it may have looked like a simple wedding, but behind it stood ships, warriors, territory, and influence. Through this marriage, Grace stepped deeper into the dangerous politics of Western Ireland. She learned how alliances were made, how enemies waited, and how quickly a peaceful agreement could turn into a fight. Donal was known as a violent and unpredictable man, the kind of leader who could win loyalty through fear as much as respect. Grace, however, was not simply standing behind him. She was watching, learning, and building her own reputation. Then, as so often happened in this brutal world, violence changed everything. Donal was killed during a conflict with rival clans. Many people expected a widow to step back, disappear from politics, and let men decide what came next. Grace did the opposite. She gathered followers, defended her interests, and refused to become a footnote in someone else's story. Instead of losing power, she became more dangerous, because now people understood that Grace O'Malley was not powerful because of her husband. She was powerful because she knew the sea, understood politics, and had no intention of asking permission. After Donal's death, Grace O'Malley did not retreat into silence. She returned to the sea, where she was strongest. The waters around Connaught and Mayo became her true battlefield, her road system, and her kingdom. From hidden coves and rocky islands, she commanded ships, gathered loyal sailors, and watched the sea lanes like a hawk. Merchant ships passing through her waters could be stopped, questioned, taxed, or attacked if they challenged her authority. To English officials, this looked like piracy. To Grace, it was control, survival, and power on the edge of a collapsing world. She understood something the Empire often forgot. The person who knows the coast controls the coast. English maps could draw lines over Ireland, but Grace knew the tides, the rocks, the winds, and the places where large ships should never follow. Her ships were not just weapons. They were messengers, supply lines, political tools, and symbols of independence. With every voyage, Grace became harder to ignore. Her name travelled across harbours, castles, English reports, and frightened whispers. Some feared her, some followed her, and some were foolish enough to underestimate her. But on the Western Sea, under grey skies and storm winds, Grace O'Malley was not a rumour. She was the authority. She did not need a throne. She had ships, sailors, strategy, and a coastline that answered to her name. As Grace O'Malley's power grew, English officials in Ireland began to see her as more than a local problem. She was becoming a political nightmare. She refused to behave like the kind of Irish subject the Tudor government wanted to control. When it benefited her people, she could negotiate. When she was threatened, she could fight. And when officials tried to trap her, she could slip away with the tide. This made her dangerous, not because she was reckless, but because she was practical. Grace understood when to make peace and when to become the storm. To men like Sir Richard Bingham, the English governor in Connaught, Grace was exactly the kind of person who made conquest difficult. Bingham wanted order, obedience, and English control. Grace represented everything he could not easily command. Reports about her painted her as a pirate, a rebel, and a troublemaker. But those reports also proved something else. The English were paying attention. Every raid, every alliance, every refusal to obey made her harder to dismiss as just another coastal nuisance. The English could send orders across Ireland, but orders were only ink on paper if no one nearby could enforce them. And Grace knew how to use distance, geography, family loyalty, and fear better than almost anyone around her. So the Tudor officials tried what empires often try when they cannot control a leader directly. They went after the people around her. Her family was threatened. Her influence was challenged, and her son, Tibbot Bourke, would become part of the pressure placed on her. The English believed this would force Grace to bend. But they had misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. Grace O'Malley did not break under pressure. She sailed straight toward it. Most people under pressure from an empire would hide, surrender, or send a desperate letter. Grace O'Malley chose a much more terrifying option. She would not beg from the edge of Ireland. She would sail directly to the centre of English power. In 1593, Grace O'Malley crossed the sea to meet Queen Elizabeth I herself. Think about how strange that moment was. One woman ruled from palaces, portraits, laws, and royal ceremony. The other ruled from ships, cliffs, storms, and loyalty. Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen, the face of Tudor England. Grace was the Sea Queen from the western edge of Ireland. And somehow history brought them into the same room. Grace came with complaints, demands, and a very clear purpose. She wanted her family released and her enemies restrained. She was not there as a helpless victim. She was there as a leader negotiating with another leader. The English court expected ceremony, obedience, and carefully rehearsed respect. Grace brought salt air, stubborn pride, and the confidence of someone who had survived storms they could only imagine. Legends say Grace refused to bow because she did not recognize Elizabeth as Queen of Ireland. Whether that detail is fully true or not, the image is unforgettable. In that room, two very different kinds of power stared at each other. Elizabeth had the throne, the crown, and the empire. Grace had the sea, her people, and the nerve to stand in front of the most powerful woman in England. For a moment, the empire had to listen to the pirate queen it had failed to silence. The meeting between Grace O'Malley and Queen Elizabeth did not end with chains, prison, or execution. That alone was remarkable. Instead of crushing Grace, Elizabeth listened, and in that room politics became more useful than punishment. Grace asked for her family to be released, for her property to be respected, and for the pressure from English officials to stop. Elizabeth had reasons to agree. Grace was troublesome, yes, but she was also useful if brought into the Tudor system. In the brutal logic of empire, yesterday's rebel could become tomorrow's ally if the deal was convenient enough. So Elizabeth granted some of Grace's requests, including the release of her son and relatives. For Grace, this was a victory won not by cannon fire, but by nerve. A woman branded as a pirate had crossed the sea, entered the centre of English power, and forced the crown to answer her. But this was not a fairy tale ending. Empires do not stop being empires because of one dramatic meeting. After the meeting, tensions did not magically disappear. English officials still distrusted Grace, and Grace still guarded her own world. The deal bought time, protected her family, and reminded the English court that Grace O'Malley was not someone to ignore. She had not defeated England. But she had made England negotiate. And for a Gaelic Irish woman in the 1590s, that was extraordinary. In a world that expected her to bow, Grace had walked into a queen's court and left with concessions. The empire had tried to make her smaller. Instead, it had helped make her legend larger. After her meeting with Elizabeth, Grace O'Malley returned to a world that was still changing around her. The old Gaelic order was weakening, English power was growing, and the Ireland Grace had known since childhood was slowly being pulled apart. But Grace did what she had always done. She adapted, negotiated, resisted, and survived. She had spent her life in a world where a single mistake could cost a ship, a castle, a family, or a future. And yet, again and again, she found a way through. Around 1603, Grace O'Malley's life came to an end. Near the same year, Queen Elizabeth I also died. Two women who had met across the line between empire and resistance left the stage of history almost together. But Grace's story did not sink with her ship, vanish into the fog, or disappear from memory. Her name survived in songs, stories, local legends, and the stubborn memory of the western coast. To English officials, she had been a problem to manage. To later generations, she became something much harder to control. A symbol of defiance, a symbol of survival, a symbol of a woman who refused to let an empire write the ending for her. She was not remembered because she obeyed the rules of her time. She was remembered because she challenged them. And that is why, centuries later, the Pirate Queen still sails through history. Not as a footnote, but as a storm that never truly ended. Grace O'Malley's life was never simple enough to fit into one easy label. She was called a pirate because she took power on the sea. She was called a rebel because she refused to obey. But to the people who depended on her, she was something else. A protector in a time when protection was hard to find. She lived in an age when empires tried to turn maps into ownership and people into subjects. Grace answered with ships, strategy, family loyalty, and the stubborn belief that her world was worth defending. She did not defeat the English Empire. That would be too simple, and history is rarely that kind. But she forced that empire to notice her, fear her, negotiate with her, and remember her name. And sometimes, in history, that is its own kind of victory. Because power is not always a throne, a crown, or a palace. Sometimes power is a ship cutting through grey water, a voice that refuses to bow, and a woman standing at the edge of the world saying, "No." Grace O'Malley was not a queen because someone placed a crown on her head. She was a queen because the sea answered to her, her people followed her, and even an empire could not ignore her. And that is why the legend of the Pirate Queen still refuses to sink.